Hey all, welcome to our question and answer session with the filmmakers of the DisOrient Film Festival Shorts program, Raising Your Voices. My name is Jason Mack. I'm one of the founders of DisOrient and past executive director. The films in this program really all have a theme of uplifting and the many silenced voices of our communities. And I think these films make clear that the acts of resistance really come in many forms. And so first, welcome to all of our wonderful filmmakers today. Appreciate you spending your time with us. I'd love to start with you introducing yourselves. If you would just say your name, your film, what film you worked on, where you're calling in from, your role, and maybe a short synopsis of your film to start. And we'll start with Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben. My birth name is Fawn, but my stage name is Ben Phantom. That's what I go by. I'm calling in from Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this. My music video, Saigon, is about my father who escaped Vietnam in 1975 and then returned 42 years later. So thinking about this theme of resistance, my dad was really resistant to go to his homeland. He didn't want to go back because there were so many painful memories attached to it. And it took a lot for him to go back, and I was able to go with him, and I filmed the trip and made a music video to one of my songs. And so that's my project here, and I can talk more about it later, but I'll keep it short for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ben. Jaime.
Hi, I'm Jaime, and I created the short film Equality Tea, which I actually made in 2020 because it was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment's ratification. So basically, women got the right to vote in 1920, and I wanted to create the film to showcase women of color that were part of the suffrage movement and how the 19th Amendment was implemented in a way that benefited mostly wealthy white women. And the way I did this was to parallel the history of the suffrage movement with the tea trade, interestingly enough, because a lot of people who raised money for the suffrage movement actually did it through tea, including in California, the Women's Suffrage Party in California. So yeah, that is my film. And right now, I'm just super excited to hear about everyone's work in this festival. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. Thanks, Jaime. And next we have Eric, or ETA.
Hey everyone, my name is ETA, and I made the short film Confluence, which is actually a visual accompaniment to a series of showcases that I run through my organization called Moon Room, which began in 2017 for AAPI month. And it began as a way to put unfamiliar faces in familiar places, because in the music scene in LA, it's predominantly white, and I wanted to put queer artists and Asian American artists in spaces that were less familiar to the people that were there. And in 2019, in which Confluence was made, it evolved into spaces that were created by queer and people of color. Mm. And for Resistance, I tried to make a aesthetic that was maybe less Western in style. So a lot of the score and the pacing is more meditative. And I'm really excited to be here and hear about everybody else as well. Thank you for having me, Jason, and DisOrient.
Great, thank you, ETA. Daisy.
Hi, my name is Daisy, and I'm calling in from Portland. I submitted the pilot episode of my docuseries called I Am But I Am Not, and it's still a work in progress. So it's just the first episode is just me kind of talking about what I hope to gain from these interviews that I hope to be conducting. And basically I talked about my own experiences with the anti-Asian sentiment that has been happening because of COVID-19, kind of addressing like anti-Blackness within the API community. And what I'm really interested in is like intersections of identity and how people have been reacting to the racism that has been happening with our community. And so, yeah, I hope that non-API people will understand like the struggles that we're going through right now, because often the Asian community, I feel like it's not really considered like people of color, and that our struggles are really minimized.
Thank you so much, Daisy. Valerie.
Hello, I'm calling from San Francisco, and I made Radical Care, the Anti-Sewing Squad, which is all about a sewing group that I've been in since the beginning of the pandemic, which makes face masks for people who need them, like needy communities, and donates them. And we started sewing these masks because we were so pissed off at the government and how they fucked up the COVID response. So, and then it's sort of become like a big, it's a big organization. Now we have like 800 people. I wouldn't even say it's an organization, it's a Facebook group. So it's in collaboration. The film is in collaboration with the Kronos Quartet. So they do the soundtrack. And then I got a whole bunch of clips from the aunties themselves. They sent them in because, we couldn't go out and shoot during the pandemic. So everybody just like, we transferred me a bunch of clips of themselves sewing and ironing and cutting and talking about what the Auntie Sewing Squad is about. And so I just edited them all together and made this short piece.
Great. Thank you so much, Valerie. Well, welcome, Myhraliza. So glad you could join us today. So what we're doing is we're just going around and doing a round of introductions. Where are you calling from? What's your film? And give us a brief synopsis.
Sure. So aloha, my name is Myhraliza Aala. I am based in Portland currently, and my film is Brightside, which it follows a young college student, Nicola, who is battling with depression, but also battling her own father's depression and having to navigate that and trying to find support to help her get through dealing with her father.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start with the film Saigon, the music video. Ben, would you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the song? Was it actually about your dad?
Sure. It was. The song is from my father's perspective, and part of what I'm dealing with in the song is this concept of multi-generational trauma. So for my dad growing up in the Vietnam War in Saigon, experiencing a lot of violence and trauma, and then when he came to the States and raising me, he never really talked about that, but it was always kind of this like unspoken presence in the room, his anger and violence, and it affected me a lot, even though I didn't know how to articulate that and I didn't understand where it was coming from. And so over the years, my dad and I have gotten closer as he's aged and become more gentle. And then when we finally went to Vietnam together, it was a really powerful experience for both of us. The lyrics talk about coming home, and oh my God, you're in my bones is the first lyric of the chorus. And so it's this idea of, him finally being able to face that and go to those places and come to terms with it. And what came out of it was he loves Vietnam, he loves his home, and he was really feeling severed by not having that connection, and so even though there's a lot of painful things associated with the past, I think that when we face it and we are willing to make the connection and see the beauty in it, then we're able to heal. And so we were both able to heal through that trip and that experience, and that healing has continued for both of us. And we've been back since, and we're hoping to go again this winter, knock on wood, if everything's safe. So, yeah.
So has that changed your relationship with your father?
Absolutely. It absolutely has. I would say that we've become really good friends, and I understand him a lot more now. Growing up, I was always confused and angry at how kind of angry and violent he was at times, and I didn't understand it. And so, you know, on the trip, he started talking about things that he never talked about growing up, and he would talk about, you know, where he experienced violence here and what happened. And we went to our personal family cemetery, which is in Hue, the imperial capital, and got to see. And he told me about, you know, who he remembered, and I really got to understand him in a powerful way, and in doing so, understood myself a lot more.
Wow. Sounds very like that was very powerful.
Was.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
I'd like to move to Jamie. Jamie, you did the film Equality Tea. I thought it was such a really clever way to talk about the intersections of sexism, racism, and so many other things in relation to the suffrage movement. I was wondering, how did you even come up with the idea? How did you make tea a metaphor for equality?
Sure. So when I saw that there was actually a literal brand called Equality Tea that was being sold, and I just immediately was like, oh, that's so good, because the history of the tea trade is so complicated and violent and completely not about equality. So, you know, with the opium wars, and just like, I didn't know about Robert Fortune, who I talk about in the short film briefly, who was a Scottish botanist that the British hired to steal tea plants in China and disguise himself as a Chinese person. And it's just so, like, the spy mission was so crazy. I don't know. And I just really wanted to link the two, because, you know, when people thought about celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, you think about, you know, white feminist suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony or Carrie Catt or Alice Paul, but very few people know about the women of color who's to contribute to the movement. And very much there was violence in the way those movements were handled too. A lot of it was very segregated. A lot of people didn't understand intersectionality. So when Black men wanted the right to vote, a lot of white women were against that, even though they were supposed to be in solidarity with Black women. And it was just a mess. And it made me think about, well, how can I then parallel these two histories? And another reason why I chose tea was because at the time, like, there weren't a lot of safe ways or socially acceptable ways for women to gather and organize politically. So tea parties were one of the very few things women could commonly do without being judged. They can have a tea party. It's all a little tea party. And that's how they would congregate. So I thought it was really interesting for multiple levels. And of course, you know, with the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution, the idea of tea as a sort of form of oppression or liberation had been really interesting to me. And then the actual process of creating the film, I mean, it was a commission from the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. I'm based in New York City. I'm just reporting from LA right now, working on a different project. But yeah, Park Avenue Armory in New York City was the one organizing the exhibition. And then Laundromat Project, which is like a socially engaged arts organization, commissioned the piece. And at the time, it was actually supposed to be for a live event at the Armory. And I'm normally a theater artist, so this is my first film ever. I kind of was forced into making the film because all of our live performances were going digital. So the way that I wrote Equality Tea initially was for like a theatrical piece. And it was completely different from how I executed it. But my reasoning was, I'm not going to have live actors in the middle of a pandemic. If no one knew how this thing spread, no one knew even if you can be outside and not have it spread. So I truly worked completely alone in my house, and it was wild. I'm really happy I did it, and I'm really grateful I get to be with you here, because it is truly my first film.
Wow. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later.
Jason, I think you muted yourself.
I guess I muted myself. Um, you gotta love Zoom. So Eric, ETA, your film Confluence is, I would venture to say, experimental, and has a lot of, I would say, sort of psychedelic imagery with sort of meditative music, with um, uh, just sort of lots of voices talking about identity and who they are throughout. Could you talk a little bit about your artistic choices of why you decided to tell these stories in such a, I would say, beautiful and unique way?
Yeah, Confluence is a documentary that really was born from practicality. I tried to think about the simplest and most efficient way to capture the showcases that I organized during AAPI Heritage Month, and shooting it in slow-mo and these various venues was the most practical. And what I ended up doing is gathering uh, audio clips from a lot of the artists that were involved and participated in these showcases. Um, when I think about generational trauma, I wanted to have an aesthetic that was slow and meditative because I wanted it to feel like a healing process. And I wanted to highlight the diaspora of experiences and find a unifying thread between all of us. So I think the psychedelia is kind of, in a way, a metaphor for the voices of our ancestors communicating back with us and helping to find that reconciliation. And for me, the guiding force was a quote by one of my favorite directors, Apichatpong Ruwatseticool. And he says this one thing in an interview where he's like, you can sleep in my movies, it's okay. And I was like, if I can make a documentary where people feel calm enough to fall asleep to, then I've done what I've wanted.
That is lovely. Let's move to Daisy. Daisy, you're a student at OSU, Oregon State, and your film is I Am, But I Am Not. I was, I really resonated with the part of the film where you start talking about your family and talking about how some of your elders in your family are more conservative. Um, what was that? What was that like in making this film? Have they even seen it? How have they reacted to your piece?
Um, truthfully, I'm a little scared to show them, because they do have very strong, uh, strong opinions in terms of politics. And so when I was making it, I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how they're going to react. I haven't even shown my parents, actually. They don't even know I made this film. So it'll be a surprise for them. But yeah, slightly terrified to show them.
Yeah, that's a pretty common theme with a lot of Asian American filmmakers. And I think maybe we should jump into that in a little bit. Before we do that, let's go to Valerie. Valerie, I thought your film, Radical Care, the Anti-Sewing Squad, was so heartwarming in a time where there's all this death and destruction. first, how did you fall into the Auntie sewing squad?
You know, I can't really quite remember, except that I just know that back in March, there weren't any face masks available. And so I looked up a pattern online to try to make some out of like some scraps of fabric I had lying around. And then my friend Christina Wong, the performance artist, she did the same thing. And she decided she would make a Facebook group to see if we could kind of pool our resources, because it was really hard to find stuff like fabric and elastic at that time. And then it just grew and grew over the past several months. People, who got involved were really interested in trying to do something, as opposed to just sitting around being really like kind of mad and upset. Although we do have something that we call rage sewing, where you're just so pissed that you just go and like make a bunch of mess, and then you feel better, because at least you're doing something positive that feels like it's contributing to helping solve the problem, as opposed to just feeling like a helpless victim. So yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of us, that was really an important thing to help us get through this whole crazy situation. It certainly made me feel better, because otherwise I would just be like in this like downward spiral of anger and depression and frustration. So to actually have like a tangible thing to be able to do was really great. Yeah. And then when Cronus asked us to make a movie with them, they had already picked out a piece of music that they thought would match what we were doing. They kind of knew about what we were doing, and it worked out really well, because the song is the piece of music was written by a Filipino American composer, Susie Ibarra. So that kind of matched too, because most of the people in the Auntie Sewing Squad are women of color. And it's it was very percussive. She's like a percussionist. She's a drummer, so it kind of matched like the sewing machine sounds and so forth. But the most important part for me was that all the clips were shot by the aunties themselves and sent to me. And then the second part was that it did feel really like collaborative, and also that people were trying to, like you said, find some kind of hope in this desperate situation, and looking out for other people is a really good way to do that. So focusing outward as opposed to focusing inward.
Can I ask you what radical care means to you?
Radical care, I mean, I guess just sort of the idea that you're sort of trying to, radical means root, right? To get to the root of something. So to try to get to the root of how you can help out people, and also go beyond the boundaries of what we think about, like how you would deal with this kind of situation, as opposed to just like hoarding toilet paper. Or whatever, instead you are trying to reach out to other people and to help them out, and to just be a community of people who are thinking of others. And I think that probably that was in response, again, like I said, to the Trump administration's doing exactly the opposite of that, just being incredibly selfish and incredibly like idiotic, and not very caring in any way about what was happening to human beings. They were just really interested in how Wall Street was doing. So that was emblematic of that particular presidential administration, of course. But in this case, in the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of people died as a result of that. So we really felt like we were trying to push back against that and like literally save people's lives. Yeah,
I love that. And when I first read your title, I was struck with thoughts of, the Black Panthers, and, ideas of mutual aid and breakfast programs, and how you serve the communities. So I thought, this is the 2020 version of what mutual aid looks like. And
like I said, getting to the root of how you can help people, as opposed to having to deal with like government structures or political structures or whatever. You just go straight to the source. You give your stuff to people, and directly to them. Yeah.
Great. We'll come back to that. So let's talk with our Brightside director, or associate director, actor, and writer, Myhraliza. Is that how you pronounce your name? I'm sorry.
Myhraliza.
Myhraliza.
Yes.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you, your film is really tackling and taking on ideas of mental health, suicide, really taboo subjects in the API community. And I wanted to ask, what sort of cultural considerations went into how you wrote and framed your narrative? Um, and then could you talk a little bit about, for those who have actually seen your film, what have been reactions to it?
So thank you for that question, but I wanted to first shout out to Valerie because I think I'm one of the people that cut up some of the cloths for because Christina Wong is one of my good friends. And so so it's kind of cool to see you here. So thank you for what you do. But I did contribute my small part. But going back to your question, Jason, so I am my background, my core is acting. And having been to DisOrient as an actor, I was inspired by all the films like 2 or 3 years ago when I attended. And I thought, well, instead of waiting for people to cast me, I'm going to make a film and start putting my own work and my own content. And one of the things that I thought about was, there's not a lot of Filipino stories out there. And as you said, suicide and depression is a very taboo topic in the API community. For me, I know personally how that feels like, and I wanted people to know that they're not alone, because I think oftentimes you can't share those kind of stories with your family because you don't talk about it in your family. And I wanted to especially, and this was pre-COVID, but it's even more so during COVID, like you don't know, some people don't know coping mechanisms. And I've had friends, family members who didn't know how to reach out and took their own lives. And what I'm thankful to DisOrient is that, this is a very touchy topic, and, it was challenging to get into the film festivals. And so I'm very grateful to have Brightside be part of DisOrient to get that message out, because I think it's really important that people know that this is prevalent in the API community and that we need to be able to talk about it, because if we don't, then there's more lives to be lost. And the numbers, we don't talk about it often about the numbers, but the numbers are high in the API community. As far as those who have seen it, it has not been, because of COVID, a lot of, even we've been in festivals, they haven't streamed it. We're actually going to a film festival tonight. I think that a lot of people want to know more about the dad, like how was he contributing to Nicola's angst about depression and how she deals with it, because she can't talk to him about it. And I think that's also common in Asian Pacific Islander families. Like I know in my particular family, you don't talk about your problems, let alone talk to a counselor about it. And so I know that I'm hopeful that when people see that they know that it's okay to go and ask for help. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I want to open it up to everyone, to talk a little bit about this idea of cultural productions being acts of resistance, particularly for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. How do you feel about it as an API artist? Do you feel like you have a responsibility to the community, or do you feel like this is art, and this is art that you do, and it's about being creative?
I mean, my answer to that is that all art is political, even if you don't see it that way. So, you can pretend it's not, but it really has some kind of effect on society in one way or the other. So, but I mean, I think it's really great that you're having this particular program focused on this, because Asian Pacific filmmakers have had a long history of making really activist work. So it's, explicitly activist work. So it's really great that you're trying to like bring that into the spotlight in this particular show. Yeah. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Valerie.
I just want to say that hearing everyone's thoughts on their projects, I'm really excited to screen all of them. So thank you for participating in this and speaking about your movies. And in response to your question, Jason, I mean, where's the fun in creating if it's not subversive? You know, I think experimenting and finding new ways to express communities and trauma and our own personal experiences, reflecting on them is just healing and also, you know, full of adventure. So I think it's great to resist the norms that we are placed in.
Great. Thank you, ETA.
Yeah, I'll echo the sentiment. I'm really excited to see all of your films as well. And that's a fantastic question. I really had to take a second and think about it. And I think for me, you know, I can't make any statements that I'm not living in my life. And for me, my life has to come first if I'm going to make any sort of statement. And so, you know, yes, I want to be somebody who challenges the norm and creates positive change in the world. And I think that has to start with how I'm living my life. And for me in this project, you know, I had so much anger towards my dad and towards that history. And so by overcoming my resistance to that and my dad overcoming his resistance to facing his past, we're hopefully able to create something that could inspire other people to come to terms with their family and their history as being the goal. But I can't make that statement if I'm not doing it or trying to do it, you know. And I think yeah, I think that's where I'm at with that. It's a great question.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I can chat a bit about how that relates to my process with the quality tea, because I made this film because it was commissioned specifically for the 100th anniversary, and the way that exhibition was created was to highlight mostly women of color who are artists, 100 different women artists, to create pieces that reflect on the 100th anniversary. So going into it already, there were 99 other artists, many women of color, who were all reflecting at the same time on this history. So already I felt, I guess, very honored and felt the responsibility to this larger community. Just the nature of the piece. In other pieces that I've done, you know, on my own, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. So I do theater, I do performance work. Now I guess I do films, but in all of it, you know, even things that seem more abstract or seem a little goofy, or, you know, one time I did a piece where I just had different textured foods and invited people to press their ear onto my ear, and just passerby in 14th Street, Union Square area would come up to me and press their ear against mine, and just we would hear each other crunching on food. And even though that sounds very random, it's like, how are you serving your community by listening to people's mouth sounds? Like, it actually, even that project felt like I was honoring the community, because I was like, oh, I've never pressed my head against, you know, 100 strangers over a weekend, you know, and kind of having that intimacy with someone I didn't know, and all sorts of people, was kind of a form of radical intimacy, or like radical love in certain ways. So yeah, I think I agree with Ben, where I think if you're modeling your life with a certain outlook and values, and you're an artist, those things are going to come up in your work, because naturally, if you're honoring yourself and you're being honest with what you're intending, it should kind of come out in ways, whether you are consciously thinking about it or not. And I think the most exciting projects that come out of my particular process are when I find collaborators that share that vision. I mean, Equality Tea, it was just me and Matt, but and even then, I felt like I had collaborators in books. So like I did a lot of research and was reading up on a lot of great authors that wrote about the history of tea and the movement and the suffrage movement. So yeah, they were quite collaborators, but I felt in community even in my pandemic isolation.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
I just wanted to add in terms of resistance, like I already mentioned that I wanted to create more content and more representation of Filipinos, because I don't think there's enough Filipino stories out there, but also putting women in film, like the number of producers or directors that are out there, like we need more representation there. Since Brightside, I'm on my third production, so I've kind of been addicted, and it's now more in, it's about empowering women and flipping the script on men. And I echo Daisy's sentiment about, sharing our stories with our parents. Because I think that's the other resistance, is that, telling our parents, you know what, we can be artists and be successful too. We don't need to be nurses or doctors. That, I was the designated daughter to be a medical doctor, and I did not pursue that path. And so when it comes to my films, I have not shown my parents. My sister has seen my second production, but even then, it's a little risque. And so those are things that I would be afraid to show my parents. But I want to come to the point where we can be who we are and be able to share with our family the kind of stories that we want to share. And so that's what I would add about building community and resistance, is that I think we all have similar stories. When Daisy was saying, she was like, I'm so scared. I was like, girl, I know how you feel.
Coming out as an artist to API parents is not easy. Daisy, your thoughts on, cultural activism and how you see yourself?
Yeah, it definitely resonated with what everybody has been saying. I also just wanted to add that reflecting on like my education and just thinking about like when I'm doing like a research project, like I was writing an essay about like Asian American art, and I felt like I couldn't find anything. So I just feel like our representation, even just being here right now, is really important in resilience, because I feel like, again, we're very invisible. So I feel like just putting yourself out there is an act of resilience.
Thank you so much. And in talking about resilience, a lot of you have already talked about different forms of trauma. And I'm just curious in terms of how much of your personal trauma has influenced your work.
That's loaded.
I know. Yes. The answer is yes.
Yes, lay down on my couch here.
Like,
and
should
tell
we
me all
say
about it. Yeah, this is
Well,
so
I have some
anti-Asian
stuff to
American
say
right
about
here.
that. First of all, I think the question is important, but also I would like to note that my friend Cherry said it well. Cherry Lusai is a playwright, and she said she was having a conversation with another Asian American artist who was wondering, what are we without our trauma, in the context of sharing our projects with mostly white gatekeepers, and sort of this, on the one hand, trauma does feed art, not just for Asian American communities, I think for everyone in the world. But, it's not, there's also a lot of joy and a lot of joy that comes from trauma too. I'm healing from trauma, don't get me wrong, but I am wary sometimes of, you know, and can we make work of value that pushes beyond trauma, or, you know, so, or is that the expectation? I know that's a spicy hot take opinion, but it's
That's a
something that
really
I
interesting
felt.
question.
I mean, I feel like in some ways Asian Americans are perceived as not having trauma, right? We're like this model minority that has done so well in the US. And so now that all of this anti-Asian violence is coming out like of the woodwork and people are paying attention to it in the mainstream, it's like, oh, wow, how about that? But, you know, historically, Asians have had a lot of horrible things happen to them in this country. So I think that it's okay. I feel like we can talk about it because I mean, the other extreme is that, oh yeah, you guys are all just like crazy rich Asians, right? You're all rich people. You all do really well in school. You're all doctors. What are you complaining about? So, so I mean, if we're gonna have to like educate people a little bit, that's okay. Yeah.
I would also add that with Brightside, I share that it's loosely based on my personal experience. And I know that when I first went to counseling, like, so when someone suggested that, I was horrified. I was like, I'm not gonna go to counseling when I was in college. And then, but now it's just, it's like, I feel like it's normalized because I enjoy going to therapy when I need to. And I think people need to hear that it's fine. Everybody goes to therapy. Everyone needs extra support. And I think when we share our traumas, we were able to realize that this is all relatable to everyone. And then so there's not that much, there's not as so much stigma to our traumas. And then we can begin to heal from those traumas. And I know that when I was writing this and when I made this, you know, one of my pitches was to women in film PDX for funding. And one of the opportunities was, which I would love to eventually do, it's just been really busy, is to go to counseling campuses and use this film to talk about suicide and depression and how you can get help. And so if that can be a vehicle to let people start talking about, you know, the challenges that we have and a mental wellness, then I would love that opportunity for, you know, my story to say, look, and most of my friends think that I am always like misconfident and whatnot, and that I don't need help. So when, you know, when this, you know, when I shared my story to some people, they're like, wow, you're depressed. And I was like, yeah, sometimes life can be hard. And so I think when you share that part of you with others, then they can feel a little bit feeling like, okay, well, I'm not weird, or I'm not odd, or I'm not challenged as I think I am. There's other people that feel this way too.
Yeah, that's another great question. I think for me, the big distinction is how subtle do I want to be about that? Because like I said, like I was saying before, I think that if first of all, I've never met a human who's not traumatized in some way, big or little. And so if I'm working through the trauma in my own life, that's going to come across in my art. And so then my choice is how subtle or direct do I want to be about that? And that has changed for me over time. And sometimes I prefer to be more general or vague in my song lyrics, and other times, kind of like was mentioned, it's important for me to identify. So for me, I've struggled with addiction and alcoholism, and at a certain point, I decided to write about that and be open and public about that, and I think that was a good decision for me. It took a while before I wanted to do that, and so yeah, I think there's just times to be really subtle about the healing process, and there's times to be really direct and open. And I think for me, they can vary. This is a great platform to be really open and direct, because you're opening it up for that kind of dialogue. So thank you.
I think that is such a great point. It brings up the question for me, how have your films helped you heal from your traumas? Because I think that's the better question is, you as cultural producers, we typically think of it as producing for others, right? The gaze of whomever your audience is. But has it helped with the process of healing for yourself?
I'm gonna just go off what Ben said, and I've gone through the same journey of broadness and specificity, how much of the nuances of my personal experiences I want to portray in my work, and how much do I want to make it more universal. And in terms of trauma and presenting joy, uh, I think through my work, I've actually found a way to connect more to my cultural heritage. Part of my own personal experience has been growing up in predominantly white spaces in Orange County and having to adjust and be performative in a lot of different ways, and having some inbuilt guilt and shame for that, and not wanting to be Asian American for most of my life. So reconnecting to my parents' journey, to what caused them this trauma, reconnecting to cultural nuances that I've experienced, or the celebrations that I've like once shunned, has been a pathway for me to be uh, more celebratory of where I come from and my heritage.
Just wanted to piggyback off of that, because I definitely feel the same way. I felt like I looking back, like even when I was in high school, I felt like a lot of my trauma is internalized, and that kind of is like kind of the Asian American experience of you should be strong in front of your family because like they struggled so much to get you here, and you need to work hard so that you can make them proud and to have a better life. And so I really struggled with like, that's why I'm like terrified to like tell my family, right? Like that I am going through these things, but I feel like I can't be weak because they're already working so hard. And so through making this film, I think that's like the first step of like healing and having a better understanding of my parents, and my family and our story. And I hope people will understand that too after watching any of our films.
Yeah, with Equality Tea, I think it was, well, first of all, I did toward, it's all miniature paper puppets, the entire film until the very end, where I have an I voted sticker, which I got because I voted in my local election. And I had my I voted sticker, and it's like half of my face, and I drink my tea, and then I'm in the end credits as someone who voted. And the reason why I did that was, as I'm talking about this long history of voting rights in America, I do think about my place as a second generation American citizen, and just knowing that, Asian Americans couldn't get citizenship until very recent. Like it hasn't been, even though Asian Americans have been here for centuries, like it, they just didn't have citizenship and didn't have the right to vote. And activists like Mabel Pinghua Lee in Manhattan's Chinatown, who I talk about in this short film too, uh, you know, gathered people to support the movement, knowing that the odds were stacked against her. And a lot of these suffragists of color did it even though they knew that it would be an unlikely, um, scenario that they'd be able to successfully vote. And that was the case for decades. While a lot of wealthier white women could vote, like after the 19th Amendment was passed, most women of color and the poor just could not. They didn't have access to it because of voter suppression, because of literacy tests, because of like the moral tests too that you had to pass. You had to yeah, there were just like so many barriers to voting, and also like violence at the polls. And then of course people aren't even thinking about the Native American activists that, you know, taught the white suffragists a lot about how to govern as women. So the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that's been like the longest, you know, functioning democracy in the world, that is something that, you know, is on this land. And so it just goes all the way back to like, what does it mean to be American? What does voting mean when we're on stolen land? And then how are we, and then all the immigrants that have come here because of this global oppression and imperialism, how do we see ourselves as Americans in this place? And then of course there are people like in US territories that can't vote in like the Pacific, let's say. And so there's just so many, it's a living trauma, right? It's like the fight is still not over, and we're still pushing for equal rights and voting rights in America. And at the same time, it's about all the past trauma and all across the globe, because it's about, yeah, like global imperialism. So yeah, lots of trauma. And I'm hoping that the film highlights the successes of the movement, and that there has been progress, but also recognize that this is something that we're not only healing from, but something that we're going to keep fighting, moving on. Like, mhm.
Yeah, I just want to say how relevant all of your films are in this political moment. You know, whether it's about crossing borders, whether it's about voting rights, whether it's about, you know, Asians being considered a virus, to identity and intersections of those identities, and queer rights being under attack, to, you know, mental health and suicide, and the ideas of organizing within our community when we're so separate, right? All of these things are so relevant in this particular moment, and I want to thank you all for making your films and submitting it to our festival. I do want to close with just asking each of you, what's up next on your docket? What projects you got coming up? How about we start with Ben?
This has been an amazing experience. So thank you to everyone for participating, and thank you, Jason. Really, really honored to be a part of this. I've been in some other film festivals with this and some other music videos, but this has felt like the most meaningful to me. So thank you. I'm not sure what my next project is. You know, I spent a lot of time writing and working in my home studio, and I've got about 3 tunes that are like half finished, and kind of touching on the theme that was already mentioned. I'm working on a song about depression and isolation and mental illness. I'm also working on one talking about addiction and, you know, spreading awareness for that. I'm not sure what the next one is going to be, but I'm still creating, and I have a Patreon page where I do live stream shows and keep people up to date with everything that I'm working on, and it's part of my creative process. So I'm just going to keep creating and hope for the best. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Jamie.
Yeah, so I'm in LA now, and I am casting this weekend for a film called Color Theory, which is commissioned by Ping Chong and Company. And the short film examines the perception of color throughout Western art, culture, and science as a subtext for how we perceive race. And it's set in a lecture hall. And so it's like a surreal social satire. And we're trying to critique how gatekeepers and white institutions exploit people of color to justify oppressive systems. It's going to be completely very much shot in a green screen studio. So we're trying to take all the COVID precautions possible. And we're doing a lot of things in post. We're like compositing actors together, but it should be a lot of fun. So yeah, if you're interested in following that project, you can look at my jaimesunwoo.com, and I'll probably be posting that, or on social media. I'll be posting about that project in the coming months.
Awesome. Good luck with that, Jamie.
Thanks.
ETA, what's up for you?
Well, Jamie, I'm also in LA, so if you need some background acting of the mediocre variety, I'm here for the casting call. But I have a EP called Sexual Monk coming out in the spring, I think. And it's an amalgamation of a lot of guzheng and traditional Asian instruments with shoegaze and other rock and hip hop elements. I try to find a middle ground between this aesthetic intersection I live in, and hopefully at some point I'd like to return to narrative and make a meditative horror film. That's the ultimate goal, is something that showcases joy and trauma in a nuanced and beautiful way. And thank you everybody again.
Will I fall asleep to a horror film?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
That's a goal, but hopefully it's not with as many nightmares as profound dreams and memories.
I got a title for you, Horror Lullaby.
The horror lullaby, yes.
I'll get a producer credit or something. All right. Daisy, what's up for you?
I just wanted to also say thank you for having me. I really didn't think of myself as a filmmaker until like I just started making this docuseries. So thank you for giving me that opportunity and kind of the excuse to make it. I guess next steps for me are to finish my docuseries, record those interviews, and put those out there for Asian Heritage Month. And I actually really want to work on a project about my grandfather. I think that I really want to preserve his story. He beat cancer about 4 years ago, and so really wanted to hear about his life story and how he immigrated here, what life was like here. So it's next steps for me.
Thank you, Daisy. And Dr. Valerie.
I'm actually not a doctor. I only have an MFA. I went to art school.
Works the same for me.
Yeah. So I'm trying to make a longer version of a film about the Auntie Sewing Squad. And like I told you, I'm working on a budget right now for a grant. So it's just like tedious figures. But so yeah, the tentative title may be the Auntie Sewing Squad Retirement Tour. Because we have a book coming out in the fall, and Christina is gonna go on a book tour, so maybe I'll follow her around. And it might be the first time that a lot of the aunties actually meet each other in person, because we've all been virtual this whole year. So it'll be a lot of, tears.
Are they all mostly in the Bay Area?
No, they're all across the country. All over
Wow.
the place. Mostly California, like LA and San Francisco, but a lot of people on the East Coast, up in Oregon, Pacific Northwest, Texas, Atlanta. Yeah. All over, wherever Facebook goes.
Well, do let us know how that goes.
Yeah, it'll be a while.
Great. And Myhraliza.
Yes, well, first I want to say thank you again to everyone here. It's lovely hearing your stories. This is one of my favorite film festivals, so I'm super bummed. While I'm thankful for being virtual and still happening, I'm super bummed that we're not going to be able to congregate such great but I've actually been kind of busy. I just wrapped Oh My Dating Hell, which is an episodic that I starred in, and it got really great reviews and feedbacks during the Fertile Ground Festival here in Portland. So I'm working on episode 2 and hoping to pitch that to a couple of networks. And I'm in the middle of production. We're filming a new short film called The Selects. That's about 3 executive women producers who are flipping the script in Hollywood, but then also are getting in a little trouble themselves. And so those are the things that I'm working on, as well as trying to move to LA by the end of March.
Well, again, I want to appreciate all of you for your time and being here and for your passion and your art. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And please think of us in the future, DisOrient Asian American Film Festival, when submitting your films, because we treat filmmakers like nobody else treats filmmakers. So we want you here in person after this whole pandemic is over. We'll feed you, we'll house you, we'll put you up, and we'll have lots of fun together. So until next time, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.